Roundup. It is August 15th. And this morning we have a special guest. We have Dr. Melody Glenn, who's joining us, and our intrepid reporter, Carolyn Tracy, who did a really informative Q&A with Dr. Glenn this week on the Border Chronicle. I think I need to drink more coffee. I'm having a hard time talking this morning. Dr. Melody Glenn is Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at the University of Arizona. She's also the author of Mother of Methadone, which is available now on Beacon Press. And in the book, Dr. Glenn tells the story of Dr. Marie Neiswander, who developed methadone maintenance as a therapy for heroin use in the 1960s, weaving it together with her own story of incorporating addiction treatment into emergency medicine. Dr. Glenn also has another interesting job where she's the medical director for several fire departments at the Arizona border, where she helps train emergency workers to respond to fentanyl overdoses. And this has really given her a close-up, reality-based understanding of fentanyl at the border, which leads me to my first question for you, Dr. Glenn. We often hear in Trump's rhetoric and MAGA rhetoric, that the border is being flooded by fentanyl from Mexico, and they use this as an excuse to send military deployments to border communities, armed federal agents. What have you experienced on the ground at the border with the fentanyl situation?
Yeah, so we definitely have fentanyl in Arizona, just like the rest of the country does. We have too many overdoses. No one should be dying from an overdose in this day and age. We have very effective treatments and solutions for that, like naloxone, buprenorphine, methadone. But nationwide, compared to the rest of the nation, our levels are kind of average. So we don't have this massive flooding of fentanyl. We have very average numbers of overdose if you look at the data, very comparable to that of New York, of North Carolina, of Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois. So it's not this crazy war zone that I think gets painted so often on the media. It's really just a very tranquil, relaxed area. We don't really get that many 911 calls when I go out and ride with the crews down there. It's pretty relaxed. It's your typical stuff. It's shortness of breath. It's sometimes a car accident. The biggest issue they face is just that it's very rural. There's sort of a lack of resources, long transport times if they need specialty care in Tucson. So to see the border painted as this wild, chaotic space with fentanyl everywhere and drug lords, that's just not the reality. And it's very
Correct.
disappointing that it's being used to militarize the border, that our region is being politicized so much. What would really help us would be to keep Medicaid and not defund Medicaid. So many of our community members rely on that, and that's how they'll get treatment for addiction. That's actually the solution if we cared about reducing overdose deaths.
Right, right.
Can you talk a little bit about the naloxone leave behind program that we talked about in the interview and why that's, important and maybe
Yes,
also challenges to starting it, which I unfortunately didn't get to include in the text version.
sure. Yeah, so our fire departments in Santa Cruz County, which includes the US-Mexico border, were the first in Arizona to offer leave behind naloxone by the fire departments. So lay people have been doing this for a long time. Activists in the harm reduction community have been giving out naloxone to lay people for a long time. But our fire departments were the first in the state to do that as well. Prior to that, they have naloxone on board, which reverses a fentanyl overdose, but they would just give it to someone in the moment. They wouldn't give them a kit, or their loved ones a kit. So if they witnessed an overdose, they could reverse it themselves while waiting for 911 to arrive. But the fire chief down in Nogales asked me, he said, "Hey, I moved here from Washington State. We had a really robust naloxone leave behind program. I'd like to get that up and running down here." And I had just come from working in addiction medicine in California. I was kind of sad when I moved to Arizona because I thought I was leaving addiction medicine behind. But within like the first week, I was stepping right back into it. I was thankful for that. And so I worked with Sonoran Prevention Works to get us the naloxone to give out. Um, and the fire departments really took off running with it. They really embraced it. It changed the narrative that they had with people who use drugs instead of seeing them as waking up, this person wakes me up in the middle of the night again. I've got to go respond to an overdose again. Instead of seeing it in this sort of frustrating way as a condition where we don't have any treatments for, or we can't do anything about, suddenly with naloxone getting it out, there's something we can offer. And I also had talked to them about the very effective treatments of methadone and bupe. And so they were teaching community members about these treatment options, linking them to care. And so they felt really good about that. And so instead of this being frustrating, there was something they could do. They could actually make a difference. They could have an impact. And so they started to advertise on the radio that they were giving out naloxone. They started tabling at community events. They made these giant banners that they hung up on the fire stations saying that they were a safe station. People could come 24/7 to get help. They put not a lockbox, like a box on the outside of the station where people could go and get naloxone without having to talk to anybody if they wanted to be more discreet about it. And they did this all on their own, which I was shocked about, because if there's any other folks working in EMS or medical directors on the line, that's not typical. I might start a new quality improvement project or a new protocol. It takes a long time to roll out and get endorsed and embraced. But with this, they really just took off running with it, which I think is a testament to their excitement to have something to offer.
Cool.
Yeah, I really love this community-based solution. And I mean, you talked a little bit about how, Medicaid, harming Medicaid is going to, you know, there's going to be less access to treatment for overdose. What are some other things? How should we treat addiction? What could be done right now to just lessen the effects of these
Sure.
overdoses?
Yeah. And so, they often talk about the opioid epidemic, and I prefer to say it's the fatal overdose epidemic, because, like I said, these overdoses can be prevented. They can be prevented. They don't have to be fatal, um, as long as we see them as the medical condition that they are. And we use a medical approach and a harm reduction approach to address it, instead of incarceration, instead of blaming people, instead of seeing it like a moral illness, or a failing or mental health issue, and solely so often we've treated addiction as something under the purview of just behavioral health or incarceration. 2/3 of the increase in the prison population is due to drug related arrests. Um, but instead, we should be treating it like a health condition, like diabetes, like hypertension, like all these other things we have. Reduce the stigma, get people the treatment that they need. Buprenorphine and methadone have the rate of fatal overdose, and they double someone's retention and treatment. So there's great options out there. We just have to use them.
Right.
Can I maybe follow up these sort of more politically minded questions with a slightly more fun and artsy question about how did you, I mean, as working as a doctor and being a mom, how did you sort of find time to write your book? And also, can you talk a little bit about the creative process in terms of how you blended different types of sources with your own story?
Sure. Yeah, it was hard to find the time, but it was something I really enjoyed. So instead of watching TV or a movie in the evenings, I would try to write some pages. I also would take just, if I had an hour or 2 hours, use that. A big chunk of my writing I actually did on my maternity leave, because I had paid leave, so we paid for a nanny to come and be home with the baby so I could still be here, see her, breastfeed, and then get back to writing. So that was really helpful. I don't know how I'm gonna write a second book without maternity leave. And for people who have been through maternity leave, that it's not like your brain's not really functioning well. You're tired, you're not sleeping
Yeah.
well, you're up every, 2 hours at night. So I was also taking naps during that time. So it was interesting. And then the choice to braid our narratives, I once I knew I wanted to write about Dr. Really Nice Wonder, I knew I wanted to write about addiction medicine in some way, and my experience of medical training. But I wasn't sure how to blend it all together. And then while on vacation, I feel like this is when writing breakthroughs happen, is when you're taking a break from the writing. And I was on vacation, and I was finally getting time to read this book that had nothing to do with the project, or so I thought. And it was Jen Chaplin's My Autobiography of Carson
Oh,
McCullers.
it's so good.
It's such a good book, and she weaves her story as an author and archivist with Carson McCullers, the author from the early 1900s. And once I saw that technique, I was like, this is it. This is the structure I've been looking for.
Yeah, I feel like that's so true. It's like I've had so many times when you're like driving, but you're like on the 8 hour drive home and like the good ideas just hit you.
Yes, yes. And that would
Yeah.
happen too in the middle of the night. So I had my little notepad out and write down things that would wake me up at 3 in the morning.
Yeah, and for everybody just joining us, we're talking to Dr. Melody Glenn. Dr. Glenn wrote a book called Mother of Methadone, which we're talking about right now, about the life of Dr. Marie Neiswander. I hope I'm saying her last name
Cl-
correctly.
Close enough.
Yes. A- And she developed methadone maintenance as a therapy for heroin use in the 1960s. How did you discover Dr. Neiswander and what made you want to write about her specifically in this book?
I had never heard about her, which I think is shocking because at the time she was everywhere. She had biopics in Vogue. She was in the
Mm.
New Yorker. She was kind of a big deal, which is something that doesn't really happen with doctors and not female doctors either. But then she sort of peered out. And I wonder if that's because of just the stigma around addiction and methadone as a whole. People felt uncomfortable. They didn't know how to address this, whatever. So I had never heard about her, which after I learned about her, I thought was a serious omission. When we're looking for medical heroes, we all hear about Paul Farmer, but what about Marie Neiswander? Um, so I had interviewed to be a doctor in a methadone clinic, and when I was there, I realized I still had some stigma about methadone, and I also suspected it wasn't just me. I knew a lot of other people who felt kind of weird about methadone clinics, wouldn't want to live next door to one, wouldn't maybe want to work at one. And I wondered where that came from. Where are the origins of this? Has this been around ever since methadone's inception, or is this something more recent? So I went to the archives. I started to look for early newspaper headlines about methadone. Turns out they're pretty stigmatizing back then too. And then I found an article in JAMA, the uh, Journal of American Medical Association, about the 40th anniversary of methadone. And on the front of the article was a big picture of Marie Neiswander and Vincent Dole, who was her lab partner, eventual husband. And just the way the article described her, I was like, I have to know more about this woman. She was charismatic, she was rebellious, she was going against the medical establishment. She was working with a group of people that the rest of the world would just rather forget. She was working in Harlem, working with a lot of jazz musicians who were using heroin, kind of bohemian. And the quotes in the article were just so telling. Like someone said, sadly, there's a stigma against addiction and addiction treatment providers. And
Mm.
and I was just like, yes, there is. And then that's explains lots of my past experiences. Like I had a medical board come after me for making treatment more accessible, for example. It's a whole different story. But I was just like, wow, someone's finally putting some explanations to this, to give me some words to describe the experience I've had these last 2 years. And so I just started trying to learn everything I could about her.
Yeah. Uh, I'm sorry, Carolyn, did you have a
Oh, I
follow-up?
was gonna say, like, I feel like one of the things that came across in your book was she was a very colorful character, and I was curious, like, do you have the impression that she had to get over stigma, or was she always just so sort of rebellious and free thinking that she just sort of, like, was ready to do this really unusual treatment from the start?
I think she had some stigma to get over too. I mean, yes, she was also rebellious. She was interesting when she was a teenager. She was using her mom's capitalist car, as she called it, to drive activists around for the farm worker movement in Southern California. So she was doing that in the early 1900s. And but she never planned to be an addiction doc. She wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon, which is a position today that still has very few women in the field. It has the least amount of women in the residency program compared to any other medical specialty. But that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. She wanted to go work at a field hospital in China. She enrolled in the military, so during World War II. But the Navy didn't have a uniform for women. So they sent her to the narcotic farm, which was half prison, half treatment facility, jointly run by the U.S. Public Health Service, Department of Prisons, and she learned about addiction there. But even when she left there, she never wanted to do addiction again. She had a horrible experience. She hated being in this prison, carceral environment. People were mean to her. There was a lot of racism in the jail. She just hated the dynamic that incarceration creates between people. Um, so she never wanted to do addiction again. But then she was the only one who knew how to treat it, how to deal with it. And so people kept coming to her and saying, hey, how do I do this? How do I do this? Or she'd walk down a hall in the hospital and see some woman seizing because her medical team didn't know how to manage her withdrawals, and she would step in. And so she sort of fell into addiction. It was not what she wanted to do, but there was nobody else. There was probably literally nobody else in New York, is how she describes it, because the forerunner to the DEA had so scared doctors out of treating addiction at this point. So she felt she had to. She felt called to it. And so I think she did have a little bit of stigma to overcome, but she said she was very thankful in the end. She was glad that she was doing this work. That was the best outcome she could have ever, better than she could have ever have predicted for herself or chosen.
Yeah. And turning back a little bit to fentanyl at the border and your experiences with training emergency responders and treating overdoses, I think beginning in 2024, the amount of fentanyl overdoses has started going down, right? As has the amount of fentanyl in the circulating. Is that still true?
It looks like it's going up again.
Oh,
It went
really?
down. It went down significantly. Still, the
Yeah,
rates of fatal overdose are too high. Even if it's going down, it's still too high. I think we forget they're like, yes, it's going down, but it's still
yeah.
like astronomically high. But it looks like it's starting to tick back up in Arizona and across the nation.
And do we know why? Do researchers have any idea why that's happening?
No, I would
Oh,
think
okay.
that it went down because naloxone was getting so much more accessible. There's more
Mhm.
doctors learning about mode, methadone, and buprenorphine, the treatment, more hospitals starting it, more clinics starting it, more access. Some of the regulation around buprenorphine's been removed. So we thought that all those things combined were leading to the decrease, but we don't even fully know that either.
Mhm.
And I don't know why it's going back up, because I don't think this administration's policies have really had a chance to have that much of an impact yet.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Medicaid hasn't been cut yet. We still have our naloxone for now, but those things are likely going to change. I imagine the overdose rate will get even worse.
yeah, gosh, that is, not good news. Well, I just wanna thank you, Dr. Glenn, for joining us this morning. We really, really appreciate it. And please, everyone, check out Dr. Glenn's new book, Mother of Methadone. You can buy the book at the link in our Q&A published at theborderchronicle.com, and we just really appreciate your time. Also, I want to give a quick shout out for our Tuesday podcast with Jesse Franzblau, the Associate Policy Director at the National Immigrant Justice Center. In the podcast, we discussed how the U.S. ICE detention system has become the largest in the world, and that was built both by Democrats and Republicans, actually. And now with Trump's big ugly bill, ICE will have a bigger budget than the military in most countries around the world. So Jesse talks about how the system can be dismantled and what elected officials should be doing at this moment to demand accountability from Trump's ICE. So I hope you'll check that out. That was our podcast on Tuesday, and of course, this Q&A with Dr. Glenn on Thursday, which Caroline did, which was really wonderful. And if you missed the first part of this live video, it'll be posted on our Friday Roundup shortly. So check it out. Thank you again, Dr. Glenn. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good weekend, everybody.